This segment provides an overview of Alzheimer's disease, focusing on interviews with the woman who has the disease, discussions by a clinical researcher who worked with and studied her, and pictures of changes in the brain. The segment reveals the progression of the disease, brain changes that accompany it, current research directions, and future treatments.
When this film was made, Eleanor, at age 51, was in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, a terminal illness with no known cure.
I'm forgetful. I say something and then I can say it right after that and not know that I said it. And that's not too comfortable feeling.
Both for her own sake and to help others study Alzheimer's, she joined a research program at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. There she was studied by Dr. Barry Gordon until her death.
I didn't really know what Alzheimer's was. I know better now because I've been reading a lot of things about it. But, it's kind of scary.
Alzheimer's ultimately is defined as a global deterioration of an individual's personality and mind. The symptoms typically develop late in life, and they represent a significant change from the person's prior well-established abilities. Near the center of the brain is a tiny cluster of cells called the nucleus basalis. It's the headquarters for neurons that run throughout the cortex. Those neurons carry a chemical transmitter, acetylcholine, that causes other neurons to fire. In Alzheimer's, the nucleus basalis seems to deteriorate. An entire system of cells begins to develop plaques and tangles that interfere with chemical transmission. Then the cells begin to die. When the nucleus basalis and its connections disappear, the cortex literally becomes starved for excitation, and its cells, in turn, begin to die.
Something's going wrong where the nerve cells are gradually dying and their processes are dying. We know that that takes place in many regions throughout the brain, but there are some regions in particular that seem to bear the brunt of it and cause a lot of the problems that patients with Alzheimer's have. Damage that occurs in the inner part of the temporal lobes, the hippocampus and other structures, seems to contribute to the memory problem that patients with Alzheimer's have and that they typically start out having. Damage in the parietal and temporal regions on both sides, on the left, seems to be associated with the language problems that patients with Alzheimer's have. On the right is more associated with the problems they have with vision in space, where they may lose themselves in space or not recognize familiar things or people. The dysfunction and damage occurring in the frontal lobes seems to be associated with the poor judgment and lack of insight that many patients with Alzheimer's have. And there still is the damage in the nucleus basalis and other structures, which may be contributing to all those other kinds of problems because it's depriving the cortex of acetylcholine, which is kind of an activator for the brain.
Frontal lobe involvement in Alzheimer's disease can be demonstrated using the PET scan. This PET scan shows the activity of the frontal lobes in a normal brain at the top of the picture. This scan of the brain of an Alzheimer's patient whose condition is well advanced shows the frontal lobes almost completely shut down. We can actually see what happens to awareness in inventor Jesse Salb's slow-motion maps of functioning brains. A normal brain on the right, an Alzheimer's patient on the left. Both maps will show electrical activity as the brain responds to a sound. This peak of activity and this one are sensory responses, the brain actually hearing the sound. This peak, visible only in the normal brain, marks the point of realization when the person becomes aware of the sound. The damaged brain of the Alzheimer's patient shows no response at all. At this stage of her disease, Eleanor began to have problems recalling even personal information.
My family, I have 3 sons, 2 sons, Paul and John, 2 sons.
She'll sit down at the piano. In fact, many a time I come in during the day and she's sitting down at the piano playing, and she has no problem reading music. She can take the same newspaper, however, and read it 3 times and mention the same article to me on 3 different occasions.
I'm speaking now, almost 12 years after Eleanor was last filmed for the segment that you saw. She lived another 5 years. Her course was marked by progressive deterioration. She went from being able to speak and making some contact with people to the point where she was babbling and not able to understand and unable to be understood. She, however, retained a lot of her social skills and could still be taken frequently by her husband and just brought to the dinner table and so forth. However, her course was also marred, as was typical with Alzheimer's patients, by hallucinations. She'd begin speaking to the chair and seemingly responding to things that nobody could see were there. Upon her passing, she and her family had willed that her brain be examined for research. And at autopsy, her brain did show the typical signs of Alzheimer's disease.
Okay. And I'd like you to try to make that design.
No cure yet exists for Alzheimer's disease. However, research is proceeding along a number of lines to try to treat the disease and ultimately to try to cure it. One important line of research is to realize that many of the problems that Alzheimer's patients have are behavioral and might be taken care of or improved by behavioral treatment. There's also now an approved drug for Alzheimer's disease that works by, we think, boosting the level of acetylcholine within the brain. It's not a wonder drug. It doesn't improve everybody, and in many cases it only stabilizes the patient for a period of time, but at least it's a start. And on the horizon are other different kinds of drugs that are trying to, for example, stop some of the other breakdowns in nerve cells that we think occur in Alzheimer's disease. There's now new clues to the genetics of Alzheimer's disease. There's also been important clues showing that some blood proteins are related to the chance of getting Alzheimer's disease. What the exact significance of that isn't clear, but what it is clear is it gives us a way of tracking who is more likely to have problems and who in a family is more likely to have problems as well. So we're hopeful, again, that the increasing pace of medical research and of therapeutic research will help solve some of the different problems that occur in Alzheimer's patients and maybe get at some of the root problems that these patients have.